All right, I'd like to thank everyone for coming by for the panel discussion. Today we're talking about SRS safety inspections. So this has kind of been a hot topic in the industry, and hopefully we can add a little clarity on this. So just starting out, want everybody to go around and introduce themselves. I'll start it off. I'm Scott VanHulle. I'm with ICAR on the RTS team. I'm the manager of that team, and we have our main output is the repairability technical support website that we started back in 2014. Before that, I was a collision repair technician, did combination technician start to finish, also did some estimating, and then started at ICAR about 11 years ago. Gerald?
I'm Gerald Gabriel. I've been with ICAR now couple of months. I am in an industry relations role with the tool and equipment side of the industry. Come from a diverse background both on the technician, refinish side, as well as front office with several body shops, both large and small, and spent some time on the insurance side of the industry as well. So kind of come from diverse background there, bring all of that together. Been excited to be a part of this discussion today with these gentlemen.
Bruce Halcro. I am a shop owner from Helena, Montana. Also the current chair of SCRS. I'm up here basically because I think that this is probably one of the most important new issues in our industry, and look forward to the discussion.
My name's Tony Adams. I am a business services consultant with Axel Nobel, also SCRS board of director. Prior to that was 33 years in collision repair industry and shop owner, and like Bruce, also want to be here and part of this discussion because it's an important piece of the complete repair process, and share the same passion that these guys do. So happy to be here with you.
So I think when we start talking about SRS inspections and safety inspections, there's a lot of different inspections that we do. You know, quality control inspections and all those different kinds of things that we're checking throughout the process. And SRS has been one that it's been around a long time and hasn't really gotten the attention that it needs. And the industry, I think, is really starting to realize that this is an important part. So why don't we just start off talking about what is actually involved in some of these SRS inspections that you guys have seen, and what do you think are some of the things that people are missing when they're doing these inspections?
Well, one of the things is first off, they can be pretty intrusive. You're checking a lot of the mounting panels, not only for like the seat belt mounting panels, but could be the dash panels. You're physically checking the connectors, making sure that nothing got ajar, making sure that none of the fasteners have been damaged in the accident.
And I would add to that, I think a piece that we're still missing in the industry is the lack of knowledge and not going and searching the OEM repair information. But to Bruce's point, most certainly can be intrusive in pulling dashes and checking instrument beam cross beams and things like that for any deformations or things like that, but still missing the go find the knowledge that's actually there.
Well, and I might add to that too, that one of the important things that I think gets overlooked a lot is following those OE procedures to a T, right? Unfortunately, sometimes we're looking for shortcuts in the industry, and we've got technicians or repair facility staff that look at those and think, well, I don't need to do that one, or that one's too intrusive, I'm not going to do it on this vehicle. And there's a reason that those are written into those procedures.
The one thing that I think gets misunderstood a lot of times is bill payers will think that this part of the process will be covered in a pre or post scan. This has nothing to do with this. This is an actual physical examination of those mounting points.
So I think, as we're looking at this, we're trying to find out what is actually wrong on that vehicle, because, to your point of the whole pre-scan, post-scan, sometimes it's not even the connector, the prongs itself in a connector. It might be the housing that's melted a little bit. And right now it's not causing a problem, but down the road, could there be water intrusion in there? Could it just a little bit of moisture, corrosion buildup? And so I think a lot of the OEM engineers, when they start looking at some of this the repair information, and it might seem like it's kind of extreme sometimes, but at the same time, they might have some case study or something that we as an industry haven't heard about. One of the things we're kind of asking them for is there a way that you can give us that information of the why behind it? Because I think if we understood the why, we have to pull out the airbag and actually do the inspection physically on it. And you also have those outliers out there where some bad actors went and took an airbag, cut it out, put a bunch of resistors in there that are timed out, and I wish if they took the time to figure out all the electrical engineering to make that light stay off and cycle through, that they would just fix it right. You know, it's a kind of a crying shame that they're doing that kind of stuff when they obviously have talents and should be using it for good instead of trying to get some of this stuff by. So is there anything really that, you know, there's so many different airbags, pre-tensioners, sensors. Is there anything that you guys are kind of finding that is overlooked when you're doing some of these inspections? Or is there anything that you found that's surprising as you're doing the inspections?
Yeah, on a few of them, doing the steering column and finding vehicles with damaged steering columns in accidents that you would have zero reason to believe that would have happened. We've run into several incidences of those. I do think one of the things that would be helpful is for the OEs to be more specific. I absolutely believe that you have to repair a car the way the manufacturer tells you to repair that car, but I also think they could give us a better roadmap of when we need to do some of this stuff.
So on the screen here, we have the cutaway on that the seat. So let's just talk a little bit about the OCS, the occupant classification systems, and some of that's changed a little bit over the years, the technology behind it, you know, and the importance of that. Gerald, you want to start with that? No, you don't want to?
No, you know what, let's let these two talk on that.
Okay.
On checking the OCS, yeah, but it's another piece of the inspection process, right? And it may involve removing the cover off of the seat on some of these things to get to them. But you know, I think it's critically important because in some of these models, it's recording the weight that was in the seat at the time of an accident. So depending on what was sitting there or not sitting there, if you know something heavy was sitting in there and there was an accident, is there deformations into where that OCS mounts? All part of, you know, some manufacturer's inspection process.
So, and I think one of the things that on the RTS side of things we've seen, I remember there was one where the inspection process said that you had to remove the side curtain airbag to inspect it. Well, when you look at the procedure, it said that the bolts were one-time use, but the bolts were not available as a separate part. The only way you could get them was to actually replace the entire airbag. So what we ended up doing was reaching out to Honda, and they said, well, that's actually an oversight in our parts catalog. And within a couple days, they made the change, and those bolts were now available, the correct length, so that those one-time use fasteners could get replaced. So I would encourage any shops out there, as you're working on these things, if there's something that is surprising or you can't do it because of the inspection process, and there's a problem, you know, make sure that you reach out to us because we can get in contact with the OEMs and we can have some of that stuff fixed. Because a lot of times, if no one tells somebody that something's wrong, how are we ever going to get it fixed? So I think that's one of the biggest things that I want to encourage the industry to do is really reach out to ICAR through the RTS portal so that we can let you know about some of the things we found, or reach out to the OEMs and get that corrected. That's one of the biggest services I think that we can offer to the industry, because we want to help make sure that the shops have everything we need, because we want these vehicles repaired correctly.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of it too, are the different areas you can go to get the correct information between ICAR, the manufacturer themselves. The DEG is a really good source if you know how to use that. It's pretty simple, but ICAR's been very quick in their responses and very appreciated at the shop level.
I would second that. It's nice to have, you know, another partner in the industry that's helping us try and solve problems. It's, you know, you aren't just training, right? You're actually helping be a bridge between us at the shop that's saying, hey, you know, to your example, the bolts on that airbag, and be able to go talk to the manufacturer and help solve some of those gaps.
I think in response to that, something that I've found with my time here with being on ICAR and being involved with the RTS, that I didn't recognize from the, so to speak, outside perspective, right? From the shop perspective, having utilized that system and those tools and gotten responses back to questions, that entire team that's responding to those, that's researching those, that's developing those documents and those responses, are industry professionals. They're people that have come out of shops. The whole entire RTS team are industry people. And it shows when you look at it from the perspective of those responses. They're easy to understand, easy to talk to, easy to relate with. And I think that is part of what makes that so valuable to us as an industry.
So we spent a little bit of time talking about why SRS safety inspections are done, but let's talk a little bit about some of the friction in the industry that we have. I think that's kind of one of the big things that you know, the industry is really struggling with, is just the understanding, and let's just talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think the starting point of that is anytime there's a cost, there's going to be friction from the bill payer, especially if you're one of the few guys in your market area that actually are doing the safety inspections, and a lot of times you get held to the lowest common denominator. I'm a firm believer at my shop that if the manufacturer says to do it, we're doing it.
Yeah, concur. It's not just for the safety of the consumer, right, but also the liability as a shop owner that we have. And I know that there's been, you know, we had a Pathfinder that we did safety inspections on from a front-end collision, and uncovered a wiring harness that was improperly routed over the top of the airbag curtain. Right. Well, as the shop and the repair professional, as the last person to touch that car, if we wouldn't have caught that issue and something would have happened, that, you know, would have stayed on us. And, you know, at some point the conversation between how much and how to are two different conversations, right? There's only one how to, and to Bruce's point, that's the way the manufacturer said to do it.
I think another big friction point there comes just from the knowledge base industry-wide. Unfortunately, I don't feel like between all repair facilities, all bill payers, consumers, the knowledge is not out there. It's not, everybody's not on the same page. And that's, of course, naturally going to create friction there between the various parties within a repair.
I think that comes into your documentation when you're doing the repair and you're doing your blueprinting. Any additional documentation or necessary documentation, you must have that attached to your file.
So when you're looking for documentation, you know, we always go to the OEM, but, you know, have you guys used any other sources, like through the estimating system or places like that have been effective?
Yeah, we have some set up through the estimating system. I don't think that's quite as complete as it can be. All data has been a good source for us at times. However, Most of our stuff is done right through the OE site.
I would concur with that. We used all data quite a bit, just because sometimes it's easier to find information in all data, but then we would defer back to the OEM once we knew what, maybe they were calling, what we're calling an apron, Nissan's calling a ledge panel, or, and find some of that stuff out. But yeah, there's other sources out there.
So if you have somebody where you're talking about needing to do an SRS inspection, what advice would you give somebody on how to present it so that the technical information gets through to that person, and how would you go about doing that for kind of a best practice, for lack of a better word?
That's part of the discussion we have with the customer from the beginning. When we've taken on the job for the customer, we respond to them. All of our emails are directed to them, and their insurance company is CC'd on it as just an information source for them. We're doing that as a convenience for the customer. We keep the customer involved in every step of that claims process. Every bit of the supplement, they are included on every email correspondence. If we have a phone call, they are emailed right after the phone call and brought up to date on exactly what was discussed about their vehicle.
Yeah, agree with that, right? And then print the documentation, right? Be able to have a discussion, right? And talk your way through it. Try and check your personal opinions and your egos at the door, and stay level-headed about it. But absolutely getting the customer involved, because we have to remember that it's the customer that's driving the vehicle that we're repairing the car for, and getting their permission to send in the documentations and the supplements, and keeping them involved in every step of the process, I think, is critical.
So I think, from the RTS side of things, one of the things that we see a lot of times is people are looking for that documentation, and we have to help them find it. And that seems to be one of the biggest things that I think we're tasked with a lot, is just getting people to understand that documentation does exist. It's not opinion. We're not sending out what we think. It's what we can document. And I think the more people that can do that, it becomes a much easier conversation, because I see it from both sides. I see times where, maybe the shop is doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and I see sometimes where the bill payer might be saying something where they don't understand that process. And so when you provide that documentation, a lot of that argumentative stances go away, because now it's black and white. Here's what it is, why we have to do it, and that tends to help.
I think for us, our biggest successes in that have been to educate the customer first and get them on your side, give them the information so they actually have it in their hand, and then have them get involved in the process with the bill payer.
Well, and so often the consumer is loyal to that vehicle anyway, right? They have a personal relationship, kind of a bond with their vehicle, usually repeated buyer of a manufacturer. They trust that vehicle, they trust that manufacturer, and so showing and providing that information, like you said, to help educate, help them understand the information that's not readily out there for the consumer, right? And doesn't necessarily need to be on a daily basis, but help them understand, here's what the manufacturer that you know and trust says about this vehicle, and help them understand that importance.
Yeah, I agree. It's not about me, right? It's what Ford says. This is what Chevy says, right? And you love your Chevy. Don't you think we should do what Chevy says?
All right, so I think that we're ready to kind of move on and talk a little bit more on some of the OEM-specific kinds of information we're looking at. And if we look at the slide that's up on the screen right now, this is a document from GM. And I know, Bruce, you'd like this document quite a bit when we talked about it. So why don't you kind of lead us off on that?
Well, I think GM's kind of leading the game with the safety inspections, because they've kind of broke it down, and they're very specific. if this happens in the accident, this is what you must do for a safety inspection. If this happens, and it kind of gives you a good roadmap of what to follow. Whereas some of the OE requests and requirements for these safety inspections are vague, to say the least. And it's always concerning, I think, to a repair shop when the safety inspections are way more intrusive than the repair was.
Yeah, I think they've done a nice job here, right? Prior to this release of the document, it was that vague sort of inspection, right? After a collision, right? Perform these safety inspections, and you're pulling headliners and steering columns and knee bolsters out of a car for a fender replacement. And I think, this is really, thanks to General Motors for this, but this is really what we need as an industry is help from them with some clarity, right? I don't think anybody anywhere really thought about, well, if you replace a bumper cover, you needed to do this, but that's how the repair procedures are written, and this is a good step in the right direction to move that way.
I agree, and I think another big benefit to it is, like we mentioned earlier, with the friction within the industry, right? Defining a collision, or which type of collision, or which incident, really helps eliminate some of that friction. Puts it down, it's on paper, it's documented. Here's what we have to do.
Well, and I think as an industry, we've not done a great job of always looking for procedures, because for a lot of years there weren't any. For the collision side of the house, there weren't any sectioning procedures. There was a lot of general information and things like that, where looking at the procedures for sectioning a rail, what we had from 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, has changed dramatically in the level of detail. But I think a lot of that came from the industry saying, we need extra help understanding this. How are we supposed to put this vehicle back together? And there was that feedback mechanism to the OEMs, where it's kind of a strange thing. We were talking earlier, SRS is just now kind of becoming a topic in the industry, but we've been dealing with SRS for a long time. But I don't think that feedback got to the OEMs to know what we really needed, because they're written for, the service technician, we're looking for a single fault, where we've had multiple airbags deploy, we've got sensors that are damaged, wiring that's damaged, and what do we have to do? And so I think that's where GM was able to develop some of this, is that feedback from the industry. So the more feedback we can do, I think the better it'll get.
I think anything like this that's too vague, one side of the aisle can interpret it one way, and the shops interpret it another way. And I think the more precise and the more exact they are in this, and the guideline that they give us to do these, the better off everybody's going to be.
I agree. The recommended gets in the way a lot. It's just a recommendation.
Yeah, and when you start talking about recommended, you start talking to some of the different OEMs from different parts of the world, and it's a very respectful culture, and to say you need to do this would be considered extremely rude. And you start understanding that, and no matter what, at the end of the day, the repair procedure says this. Are you going to be the one to go and reverse engineer and come up with your own procedure and do those kinds of things? These vehicles are only getting more complicated, and we have to change the way we look at things and work on them. So I know we brought up GM. I know there was, I believe it was Audi had some procedures where they actually, in their inspection information, will call out if it's within X number of millimeters of this part, if there's deformation to that mounting location, and they start calling it out. That's the kind of information we're looking for, correct?
Yes. That's specific, right? And it takes away the wiggle room, right? And your opinion versus my opinion, right? If it's plus or minus this, right? Do X, and that's what we need help with in the industry.
I really think this industry will take a huge step forward when industry standard is no longer part of the conversation, and the manufacturer standard is the conversation.
So just have a couple things here that I wanted to touch on. The restraints wiring repair is one that I think a lot of people overlook because some of the OEMs actually do allow you to do wiring repairs on the SRS system, which others absolutely do not allow it. You start looking at their warranty information even, and they're replacing harnesses and things like that. Maybe at most there's a connector that can be replaced, but it's not, any connector. It's the very specific terminal. They're very detailed on what that is, even under their own warranty. But if you're looking for some of that information, we have the OEM restraints system part replacement search. So easy to say that, it just rolls off the tongue. But that's where you can put in your make and model, and it'll pull up a lot of that. That doesn't mean that you don't need to also go to the OEM, but at least gives you that starting point to know, okay, I've had a driver's airbag deploy. I also need to check these things. I need to pull up the procedures and actually go through it, because you can't just replace a part and think it's good and say, well, I think I got most of it. It doesn't really work.
If I can add to that, as somebody that utilized that particular tool from both the repair facility perspective and from the bill payer's perspective, one of the things that I really liked about that particular tool in comparison to similar lists that were available within the estimating database is at the top of those documents, it tells me when that was revised. So I know that I'm dealing with a document that was revised, for instance, in June of 2021, or whatever the date may be, which when I pull it up in an estimating database doesn't list that. And that provided me with a lot of just, I guess, peace of mind, knowing how recent that information is, how recent that document came from the manufacturer.
I think one of the other things that we've found some success using the ICAR site versus the OE is a lot of times a bill payer will say, an OE saying that because they're trying to sell more parts. And I think ICAR has more of a reputation as being that neutral source. And so that's been a really helpful for my shop.
So a while back we had a repairability summit where we had a conversation on this exact topic, and one of the things that came out of that was the industry wanted us to try to get more information about all these inspections, what people are finding, what some of the issues are. We put this up back in, I believe, March. We've not gotten a whole lot of responses, so we're really looking for the industry to give us this information so that we can help form the conversation to the OEM. What are the problems with these inspections? What kind of information do we want to see in that information that'll help us? And, so anything that the industry, it takes a little bit more time to fill out a form, let us know, upload pictures, especially when it's something that you didn't expect to find. Because if we could get to a point where we looked at 101 vehicles of a certain make and model, and we see that, well, 10% of the time they had a problem with this, well, now we can tell that story of here's the things that are getting found, even on ones where you didn't expect to find a problem. So the more information the industry can give us, I really would like everyone to go to the RTS website. If you have one of these vehicles where you're doing the safety inspection, especially when you find something, fill out the form. There's a link on the home page. There's also a link on this previous screen. So if you're on that OEM restraint system part replacement search, there's a link over to that form so you can fill that out as well and get us that information so that we can help the industry, help the OEMs understand what we really need to do. So any closing thoughts or anything from you guys?
I think the one thing that I would add is sometimes a lot of this information's right in the owner's manual as far as like safe seatbelt inspections and what's required in an accident. So there's some pretty simple sources. Sometimes going into the the OE website is a little bit cumbersome if you don't know your way around.
And for help with that, if you go to the RTS website, we also have navigation videos for every single one of the OEM websites. And we also have some additional articles explaining how to get to some of the different information as well. So that can help you if you're not familiar with an OEM. If you never work on Hondas because of your area and you got one in your shop, or you're starting to work on a new vehicle that you haven't dealt with before, we can help you get started on that and save you some time. So any questions from the audience? All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us today, and it was a great conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you all.
There you go, guys. Thanks,
That went
man.
well.
Thanks for having us.